Right. Buenas tardes todos. Hello everyone. My name is Catalina Belgosa and I am a new member of this lovely organization, Revolución Educativa, and I am so honored to step in and host today's episode of our RevvED Up live stream series. For those of you that don't know, RevvED Up is a live stream series where we highlight those in our community who are making an impact. We have awarded 25 different individuals with our Impacto Changemaker awards, and we've already spoken with 4 of the 25 winners. So today we have another changemaker joining us. This changemaker is an art educator at an all girls middle school in the area known as Kansas City Girls Preparatory Academy. Welcome, Laura Flores. Hello, Laura.
Hi, thank you. And so my name's actually pronounced Laura. Others might call me Laura, but I try to stick to Laura. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started by just learning a little bit more about you. You just, of course, corrected me with your name. So yeah, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are. What are some of the things that you do, and as well as maybe even your family story and how you got to just where you are today.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that was a lot. Oh, look, I see one of my students' parents. Yeah, I miss Lali too.
Good
So
share here.
I guess to start, I'm Laura Flores. My pronouns are she, they. I'm non binary, but I'm very comfortable, I guess, presenting as, female very much. So I think, that gives me some privilege. And I want to acknowledge that. I am a Chicanx, just because I really want to align myself with that kind of identity of just not being one or the other. And so because of that, I'll identify that my family is from is from Mexico. So then I'm from the Mexican diaspora. Um, Neurodivergent, mother, wife, cycle breaker, educator, artist, anti-racist feminist. I can keep going. I've kind of filled many roles and hats, working in food service and trying to unionize there, and then kind of where I am now, being a full time educator and trying to do things on the side with the Latino Art Foundation. Oh, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. But yeah, great. Thank you. And it's very awesome knowing what you do here in the community so far and everything you have accomplished. But we'll get more into that later
Mhm.
as we go throughout the conversation. But here at RevvED, we advocate for equity within education of Latinx students. And we're always very, very curious to see what others' educational experiences are like. So please tell us a little bit just about what your experience was like within education growing up.
So I was homeschooled kind of up until February of third grade, which kind of impacted a lot of how I perceived formal education, which wasn't very much. Like I thought it was like going to be Catholic school because that's what I saw on TV from my parents' TV shows. I was like, man, they're gonna spank me with a ruler, and I'm like, oh my god. And then like it's completely like the opposite. It's like so nurturing, um, really engaging. And I was just like totally all in. Like I love being at school, to the point where I would go to school sick. And from there, I mean, I knew I wasn't the brightest, and then kind of because I just like dove in head first, then I was able to kind of, I think I got on their radar as like a gifted student, and because of that, I kind of just fell through the cracks. Um, like I was an A B student by the time I was in high school. I mean, I cried if I had a B sometimes. But falling through the cracks, knowing I could have done way better, but not sure, not knowing how to ask for that support, as as a teenager, not having the words for it, right? And so, um, in terms of public education, that's kind of how I came up. And now, looking back and reflecting back, I'm like, yeah, I feel like maybe people could have paid attention more to like students that fall through the cracks. But then again, like it kind of also points out how stressed the system is as well, right? How it's like oh, she's doing fine. I need to address the needs of students who need it more. Um, reflecting as an educator now.
Definitely, definitely. And we talk about a lot just within the organization and just in general within the education system about representation and how important, that is for many students. And I'm sure it was for you as well. Was there any specific, teachers that you could maybe rely on or trust, to go to for those types of questions that you had?
I remember, trying to think, like in middle school, I had my first Black and also Latino and also female Latina like teachers. And they weren't even in the public education system technically. Like it was through Kaufman Scholars, which I was a scholar, um, and now alumni. But they were my first like teachers of color. And while they were in my life very briefly, I think I made the most connections with them. One of them being Francisco Ramirez, who might be watching this. He's on my friends list. Or Marilu Mercado, and then also Dwayne Joseph. Um, had great stories all the time. And so, you know, being able to connect with them, and because I feel like I made more connections because of the way that they addressed us. It was more like community. It felt more like community, less like I'm an adult and you listen.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that that's very important, of course, especially being a student, former student, and now educator.
Mm-hmm.
So you work currently now at the Kansas City Girls Preparatory Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell us a little bit about just what it's like working at an all girls middle school, charter public school, especially now within the community?
Yeah, so I graduated from my undergraduate degree with my undergraduate degree in art education and minor in uh, American studies in was it December 2019. And so when I started, I had a job lined up already. I knew I had a job before I even graduated. And so I started right off the bat, January 2020. And, 2 months later, COVID happened. And so I had taught for the longest, majority in the pandemic, right? So I taught with USD 500. Um, then I was, Laura Palacios had found me, I guess, and taught me or introduced me to KCGPA. And I was just like, this is my dream job that I didn't know existed. Because, I guess understanding um, how the people who make up the education system influence and impact the students, and how maybe sometimes they don't understand that culturally as well they impact the students. It just was really hard as a former student in the same system, having to deal with the same things that now I'm like, I remember this happening a lot when I was a kid, right?
Mm.
And so when I heard of KCGP, honestly, it was kind of like, for me, it was like, thinking about, well, I don't know anything about charter schools. I don't know anything. I always just wanted to teach in USD 500 because that's where I grew up. That's where I come from. And so I hesitated because of that. But I also did not hesitate in the sense of, I know that this is an environment that's going to support what I want to teach, because I was almost scared to teach or even speak Spanish because of the parents, or at my previous school, and teach the things that I wanted to teach with art, to empower my students, right? And the fact that me as a teacher and adult in the same building, like it was, I think, devastating for me as well, honestly, but even more so for the students, just how at a disadvantage we are when we don't listen to students and educators who are from the culture, from the community. And so KCGPA was just like a diamond in the rough to me, and I was like, I am totally going to dive in headfirst. And the staff has been so supportive, and they listen to my thousands of ideas and support me, and when I ask for support, they're there. And then being able to just teach what I want to teach, without a question, has been just so, I think, liberating for me, and then also for my students, because that's what I'm trying to do, is empower and liberate my students, um, through art education, and having that flexibility with art, to be able to empower and uplift my students.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm sure that even makes your job easier, than being able to be open to your ideas,
Mhm.
because that's very important. Yeah. To not only for you, the students to be heard, but for you guys to be heard as well as educators. So that kind of takes me to my next question of what kind of issues do you see within the education system?
Mhm.
And what are you doing as an educator to kind of tackle those or just kind of change those?
Yeah. So, um, let me think on that one a little bit. So, I think when I was like looking over these questions, I was thinking about like the most notable issues I've seen like in my community, right? And I think it stems from the way I answered this. I know it's not specific to education, but
Yeah.
I'll get to the point.
Yeah. That's okay.
So, growing up, so income disparities in general, it's kind of like, it feels like the biggest thing that, um, the most glaringly obvious thing that affects everybody so drastically different, and you can see the differences, right? And so like as, um someone growing up, I really noticed these as a teenager, like as a very rebellious teenager. I was like, why is it this way? Why is this that way? And then questioning all like the world around me, just because I just was like, this isn't fair, and all this other stuff, and trying to search for answers when I knew that as a child in adult dominated world that I wasn't going to be given the answers, even if I knew how to ask them. And maybe even those adults in my life didn't even know how to answer themselves, right? And then I became more like entrenched in these issues when I started my undergraduate degree, in the fall of 2014, which also happened to be around when Trump announced his run for presidency, and then Michael Brown was murdered, and then me going through this very transformative stage in my life as well, um, going from Sumner Academy, which is like very like people who look like me, who culturally we're growing up in the same, we're like we can make those connections, then going to KU and in a very predominantly white institution, like the culture shock experienced from that. And then um my noticings just about my post-secondary education, like how professors will align themselves, against students sometimes, and having to fight that system as well. Um, and then at the same time, like having to balance having a child very young, because I had my daughter when I was 19 at the end of my freshman school year, but knowing very well that, in the sense that's kind of like that directly comes from the income disparity of like a single, my mom being, she's not single or was not single at the time, but the only income earner. And that kind of, and the stigma of birth control. And so me knowing that I wanted to be on that, but I didn't have the right to decide that, before I was 18, and then completely forgetting about it once I moved out. And so then that's a direct impact from, that part of, I don't know how to say it, like social issues, right? So then
Mhm.
I am now like, okay, now I have a child with my husband, thank you, because he's been amazing supporter of all of who I am too. Um, and dealing with all these social issues growing up or going through my phase of just like finding myself. And so, these inequalities kind of deeply affect me in at all levels, right? We can see the complexities of how that affects everybody, in everyday life. And so, um, kind of seeing how our education system could also potentially fill that gap, right? Seeing myself and being angry at
Mhm.
why didn't I get a really good like sex education as a middle schooler who was just thrown here's some STDs. Okay, I don't know what that means. Like, and so, the gaps that I noticed growing up and wishing that, I could fill those gaps, or feeling a responsibility to address these gaps as a parent, right? I think that's where my main motivation came from. I kind of just had to snap into this, and unfortunately, snap into it really quickly because I had a child, right? Um, to fulfill a goal or a role, but also just wanting to address those gaps and needs for the community. Um, and yeah, I mean, it was really chaotic the way I got there. But I mean, the biggest thing I know is like, the income disparities that also affect our educational systems as well, through property taxes and how our schools are funded.
Mhm.
Um, and that was like one of the, I think, the seeds that were planted when I was very, I want to say young in my education, like undergraduate education, but that was one of the seeds that really had me passionate about and interested about policymaking, but also just education itself and how art is seen as like this very privileged field, but it shouldn't, right? It's not. We shouldn't gatekeep it. Um, and so I hope you're kind of getting a glimpse at how complex my mind works. But that's kind of like where I make that connection of like the income disparities and how that affects art education and just education itself.
No, yeah, that's definitely a good point to bring up, especially as we go on to talk about education. And again, just knowing that there are some things within the system that aren't always helpful to educators and students. And so, no, I think you bring up some really good points. So that kind of takes me to the next question of what exactly are you doing, or how are you kind of applying that into your teaching and within your classroom? At KCGPA.
Yeah. So um, I think one of the first things I think of is um, what is it called? It's not intersectional, but just trying to integrate. There you go. Integrate like different topics of education, like just trying to show the connections between everything to art. Um, and I know it can be of much frustration to like, fields of STEM where it's like, well, let's add art, but it's like, it's another thing. But if I, at least as the art teacher, can show how these are connected, then we can also, how do you say, like, help students retain information from other classes. And so, like,
Mhm.
imagine if we were able to, as educators, just synchronize, which is like impossible, big dreaming, but synchronize our lessons so that if, students are learning how to use a ruler in math, then I can do a lesson that reinforces that, right? Just as an example. And another one is also through like teaching social issues and very explicitly through art, because that is, you know uh I mean, art gives um the freedom to discuss a lot of things, and so being able to put that in front of students, and then also through kind of like the structure that KCGPA has given me, which I didn't know myself that I kind of practiced, is restorative practices, and how that can also help to heal and liberate students in myself, um, by having a starting point to repair the harm that's been caused, and just having an understanding and being able to heal from that and forgiving ourselves. And like I feel like that is an aspect that can be often overlooked in education, because I who was it? My principal always says, students need to feel safe and loved in order to learn. And so if they don't feel safe and loved, then learning's not happening. And so, and that's often very true, right? It's hard to focus on something like school when you have so much stuff going on at home. Um, and for students like myself who are high performers, they go under the radar, but it's their coping mechanism. But not every student's like that, right? And so having restorative practices as that guiding structure for students to feel safe and loved has been very useful, like as a parent, as an individual, and as a teacher.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's great because I mean, you practice it at home with your own child.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I'm sure you definitely apply that to the classroom as well. So, why do you believe it is important to have representation and that type of inclusiveness within the school setting?
Well, I think the glaringly obvious one is like often, and this was like throughout my undergraduate, when you think of art, oftentimes you think Western art, right? You think old dead white artist, right? And so that's the narrative that dominates the field. And so when you have a lot of art educators coming out of the system, or even not even art educators, but artists, because sometimes our educators are coming from fellows programs, and that's totally like awesome. But we have this common knowledge of Western art being the norm. And so when you have teachers like myself who see this narrative and like it's not interesting to me, and then knowing that students learn best when they see themselves and when they can make connections, it's just like so obvious. It seems so like obvious to be like, yes, I'll probably do 1 week on Western art, but then yeah, we're gonna learn about local artists that are like around you right now that reflect the population of my students. It doesn't make sense to me to teach a room full of Black and brown students all year round about old Western art and old oil painting. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is very important. And I'm really glad, yeah, you brought that up as well. um, so, what would you say is one of your proudest moments as an educator, or even just as a former student, or just within your career in general?
Um, that's hard because I'm like still like only like 3 years in, I guess. Has it been 3 years? I don't know. It feels like a very long time already because of the pandemic. I mean, making it out of COVID, I guess, teaching remote,
Definitely.
that was difficult. But I think because, again, being like new to the field, I think it made me adaptable and flexible in so many more ways because I have 1,000 ideas. And I mean, they all didn't work, but you learn from it. And I think I don't know if it's so much of like proudest moments. It's like I really love it when students, like, you can see that they get it, and you see that they make those connections and they grow their love for art, but then they also try to grow their love for reading because they're reading about the artist, right? Or research, they're looking into research and understanding that art isn't just making art, it's about the work that you do before the art actually comes alive, right? And I think that was also kind of like the hardest part, right? It's just like the struggle of, well, the preconceptions of what art is. And I had another really good point. I completely forgot it, but I'm sure it'll come back to me.
Yeah, no, no worries. But yeah, I think it definitely is important, again, to have teachers, educators like yourself, teaching these types of subjects too, because like you were saying, art is a very overlooked department when it comes to education, but just as well in general. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
Oh,
think it's just truly, oh, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
remember. I was saying it wasn't so much of a moment, but I think it's just being proud of myself for constantly reflecting and wanting to be better. And I think that's hard to find in people. Um,
Mhm.
sounds like I'm bragging on myself. I don't know. That's weird, but it's like being a reflective person allows me to really be open to understanding how I may have done something well or not done something well, and wanting to always just adapt and change. Um, so I guess that's like one of the proudest moments in terms of like how I my accomplishments, I guess, because I feel like I don't have that many with
No, I think
being
that's,
a
yeah.
3-year teacher.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely something to be proud of, because there's always room for improvement in all of us. And you definitely have to be able to help, improve yourself and reflect like you do in order to take that to the classroom as well and give that back to your students as well.
and to and to tell students that it's okay to constantly change and grow and be that model as well, right? I think I've said
Exactly.
that many times. It's like I'm human too. Like I'm going to be upset, and I'm trying not to do it in a harmful way. So like, please give me some space.
Definitely. No, it's important. Definitely just take time for yourself too. And yeah, of course, do that inner work, so you can perform that outer work.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's definitely inspiring to hear what you do. And of course, we highlight your stories and others to hopefully motivate others within the community to do the same. So, is there any advice that you have for those that want to get involved in the community, but more specifically become an educator?
Yeah. Um, that's a lot because like I know the journey to being an educator was rough, not just because of, having a child and the income. I had to pick up a job part-time, full-time, trying to make money, right? Not only will that be very discouraging, having being, not privileged, but you'll also realize that there are individuals who know very well how to use the system against other people, and having to fight the system in that way, which is very like draining. And having had that experience with professors, so the pathway to being an educator, there's multiple, and I'm glad there is. Um, but no, it'll be hard, but you're not alone, right? I think what drew me to American studies was the fact that um, they understood the education system that they were teaching in, and they were willing to support as other professors, who have this privilege to help me um, get out of a situation with a professor, right? Or to support me in that situation. So knowing that, building those connections and building relationships, I think has been like the biggest, um, not motivator. I don't know. Like it helps motivate me, right? It's like, oh my gosh, that person's so cool. Like I want to talk to them. I want to, learn what they know and connect with that, so they can also hear my story and know that they're not alone. But also, having those connections to support each other, and seeing myself as now, being the one who needed so much support, to being an educator now where I'm in this more privileged role. I can help students or help other people who are trying to get into education. And so, as discouraging as maybe a lot of what I just sounded, but there's a community there to help support you and back you, and provide you with the resources that you need, even if it's scholarships or childcare, or even just trying to get through a class.
Definitely. And that's definitely what we strive to do here is help other educators like yourself that are trying
Mhm.
to make that difference. And so after receiving the Impacto Changemaker Award from us, what does that mean to you? And why do you think it's important to recognize Latino change makers within our area?
I think it's important because um, my initial thought is thinking about the way I grew up, um, because the Latino identity, or diaspora, whether it's Hispanic, whatever, like Chicano, um, is very diverse in their beliefs, right? And so, which is important, I don't want to say it's a bad thing. It's important because if we all thought the same, I feel like we wouldn't have all the amazing things we do. But it can also be very isolating as well. And so it's important, I feel like, to identify them, because then it puts a message out there to connect, to affirm people's stories if they had similar experiences, to just recognize as well, because honestly, like this last year, even though it was my first year teaching full year, it was very discouraging for a second there. And so then it, one, honestly uplifted me a little bit. And then, hopefully I'm able to mentor, people who are seeking out to understand, the educational system, even as I'm learning myself about the educational system and the world around me, and really just build a community that is reflective and has a common goal, wanting to, like, no matter who you are, wanting to teach our children to see the world around them and be the change and create the change that they want to see for themselves as well.
Definitely. And yes, that is very inspiring. And if there are people out there who want to learn more about Kansas City Girls Preparatory Academy and maybe even how to get their child involved, how can they find that information?
Yeah, so I know we have a website. Our website, I think, is kcgpa.org. I should know that. But our phone number is there. You can come tour the school, or you can just message me. Because honestly, like, I have so much great things to say. Even as a school that's an all-girls school, they're very gender inclusive. And well, how else? I think we're also trying to look for another enrichment teacher. So if you're looking to, be on a team with me, like, that'd be awesome. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you so much. We love shining a light on the important work that you and that many others provide to create a space for Latinos in all types of fields, but more specifically education. And I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And we appreciate all that you do for our community. And just continue to make us proud.
I'll try. I'll try not to disappoint, but thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
I'm glad to
Yes.
see some of my students are probably watching me. They'll probably mention it during the school year, and I'll be like, cringe, but
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Laura. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.